And now for another interview on the Bee Weekly.
Well, Dennis, thanks for coming on. Just to get things started, Jewish space lasers. Do you have access to one? What do
Jewish
we need?
space lasers? No, in fact, I've cornered the market.
You got Okay, well, that's good to know. So you got your new book out, Deuteronomy. This is a commentary on Deuteronomy. I know you've been going through. You got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus out already? Or are you going out of order?
That is to your great credit that you even knew to say Leviticus. I got to tell you, my theory on Leviticus and Deuteronomy is that if you went to any college, I don't care if it's Harvard or some local school, and you said to them, I'm betting on Leviticus for the Kentucky Derby, they would say, "Oh, really? What are the odds?" They would think Leviticus was a horse.
Well,
it's so the fact that you even said Leviticus as it is. So I'm doing a commentary on each of the first 5 books.
Right.
At Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But I didn't do it in order.
Gotcha. Okay.
So Deuteronomy is the 5th of the 5 books, but it's my 3rd volume. They each take years to do.
Gotcha.
This is in. While I'm doing it, I say to myself, you could have been doing 3 books in the time you're doing 1. You could have made a lot more money. Deuteronomy is not generally a major seller in the world. That is the advantage, though. Whenever I promote my book, I go, look, folks, one thing we can all acknowledge, no one writes a commentary on Deuteronomy to get rich.
A data point that's relevant for New Testament Christians is that Deuteronomy is the most quoted book by Jesus in the New Testament. And I think it's a mountaintop book. There's Genesis, Exodus, Isaiah. Deuteronomy is a heavy hitter, especially within the Pentateuch. This is where we can transition into getting deep about the book because we know we can talk about politics and culture war stuff, but we'd love to really dive in. So on the topic of Deuteronomy, you identify it in one of the first chapters as Moses' last will and testament for Israel and, for that matter, for the world. Can you expound on what Deuteronomy has to say to an average lay reader, Jewish, Christian, and then the world?
You have 30 seconds.
Well done. Well done. By the way, I had said what you said about Jesus and Deuteronomy to be perfectly accurate. He quotes Psalms the most and Deuteronomy second. Deuteronomy, he quotes the most of the Pentateuch, of the Torah, the first 5 books.
Sad.
So I just want your viewers to, or listeners.
Fact
checked by Dennis Prager.
Yeah. By the way, I was corrected on that because I said what you had said. By the way, as interesting, I learned tragically after I wrote the commentary, I learned that a professor at American University did a very rigorous analysis of what books the founding fathers quoted the most. Of all the books in the world, including secular books, Deuteronomy was the number 1 book quoted by the founding fathers. So you have Jesus and the founding fathers. That's a pretty big recommendation. The book, the problem with Deuteronomy is that as rich as it is, it's hard for the average reader to understand a fair number of its laws. There are 240 laws in it, which is an enormous thing. It's Moses's summary, but thank God I know biblical Hebrew very well, and it has enabled me to write these commentaries and to make sense of them. So I'll give you one and you'll just tell me when to shut up. And I'm very serious. Because obviously I could do this for hours, but I'll give you an example of a very powerful law in Deuteronomy that is transformative for our society. You're not allowed to favor anyone in judgment, and not a poor man and not a rich man. So it's obvious you can't favor the rich, but it's specifically you can't favor the poor either. This is the Bible's argument against social justice. I've always explained to people, why does the left use the term social justice? Why don't they use the term justice? Because social justice has nothing to do with justice. That's why. And they know it. That's the reason they add an adjective. It's like, what's the difference between a democracy and a people's democracy? People's democracy has nothing to do with democracy. Social justice has nothing to do with justice. Justice is, if the poor man is wrong, he is found to be wrong. And there's no affirmative action. That's social justice. Justice is no affirmative action. What is just is just. So that's a law there. There's a law that's really difficult for people. Not a man shall not wear women's clothing. And I can't think of a more pertinent law to our time. Who would have thought 3,200 years ago that 3,200 years from then, that would be a dominant issue in some society?
Now, we've done a couple of comedy sketches here at the Bee where we've had someone dressed up in drag. Is that against Deuteronomy, if it's for comedy, if it's for a laugh?
Well, I don't have an answer, because you can't have a legal system that says, but if it's a joke, no problem. It's like these laws don't come with asterisks. Like, you should stop at a red light. But if the guy next to you has a heart attack and nobody is coming from the other direction, go through the red light. You can't make a system of law that does that. Otherwise, it's not a system of law.
What we should do is
use common sense.
We should do a Babylon Bee Talmud where we're building out interpretations of the law with asterisks.
Yeah.
Yes, just that's it. Call it the asterisk Talmud.
Yeah.
Now, I what you just did is cool and so helpful, and it's one of the things that I loved about the book. I couldn't put it down, burned through it in about 3 days.
Did you read the whole book?
Yes, sir.
Wow.
So
I'm very touched, and I want people to know. I just want to say to you, first of all, thank you. It means the world to me. But I want you to know my motto. I work hard so that the reader doesn't.
Accessibility is the main word that comes to mind. It's a democratizing of what can be intimidating subject matter. And when I heard commentary, I settled in. I got coffee. But then as I started working through it, it's not a commentary in the sense that I expected, where it would be only useful as a reference material. It was a series of bite-sized essays that expounded on the heart of each law and then, trickled down into actual applications. I was impressed by the section on do not boil a goat in its mother's milk.
Oh, wow.
There were a handful of laws where on the face of it, they're head scratchers, and then you got to the heart of it and then zoomed back out into application. I mean, I guess this is where I'll turn it into a question finally. For such a dense book, such dense subject matter, I mean, it's Iron Age, Stone Age law code. What is it that Deuteronomy, should people be intimidated by Deuteronomy?
Yeah, it is intimidating. That's the reason I wrote this. And if it weren't intimidating, it would have been unnecessary to devote a lifetime to explaining it. But once it's explained, as you point out, and it gave me a big kick here, even something as obscure as do not boil a kid in its mother's milk, it has an incredibly important lesson. See, people will isolate a law here and there from the Bible and say, oh, is that relevant? And my point is, what is relevant is why the law was made. The intent of the law is eternally relevant. Maybe 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now, red light and green light will be different. But there is a reason for a red light and reason for a green light. And that's how it would be explained 1,000 years from now. One has to mean stop and one has to mean go. And the case of the boiling a kid in its mother's milk, the mixing of life and death, milk is life and the boiling is death. I mean, that's one of the major ideas of the Pentateuch, of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, that life and death are not to be commingled. You are to affirm life. There is life after death, but the Bible is preoccupied, especially the Pentateuch, with this life. Making this life good and holy is the intent.
Beautiful. I wanted you to rate our biblical exegesis. There's a person who wrote an article at the Babylon Bee. He's in the building with me. He may even be in the room with me. His headline was this, and I'll have you rate our exegesis. Man stands in awe of God's wisdom upon reading in Leviticus that you are to stay away from women on their periods for 7 days.
You know, coming on with you guys is a risk. That's all I'll say.
Good. He rates it 2 thumbs up.
I got a 2 thumbs up.
Oh, 10 fingers up.
10 fingers up. I like the verse. It really is a verse-by-verse approach, but still bite-sized essays. There was an essay that was kind of in between the verses, but about topics related to the verses that struck me. It was a good society is unattainable without wisdom. And that essay calls out the uncomfortable truth that even well-intentioned and high-knowledge people can participate in evil if they are moral fools. They're high-knowledge, well-intentioned, but morally fools. I wanted to ask about that because that speaks to our society. What's the difference between wisdom and knowledge in the Torah? And then what's the danger of a society that's full of people high in knowledge, low in wisdom?
Well, you really did read it, and that is one of the most important possible points. That good intentions are useless, truly useless. Very few people have bad intentions. The greatest mass murdering machine in history, communism, was built on good intentions. People who gave Stalin nuclear secrets had good intentions. They had no wisdom. They were gigantic fools. Our universities are an ode to the fact that there is no necessary relationship between knowledge and wisdom. Google has a lot of knowledge. The internet has incredible knowledge, but it doesn't have wisdom. You don't ask Wikipedia for how do you raise a child. That takes wisdom. It takes very little knowledge. And when I was at Columbia, it hit me, and I wrote this essay many years ago. It's on the internet, How I Found God at Columbia. When I realized I was being taught nonsense by very, very knowledgeable people. And it puzzled me. How could bright, knowledgeable people teach me nonsense? Like, for example, men and women were basically the same. That's nonsense. And I knew it was nonsense when I was in graduate school. And then the only time I ever had an epiphany, and that's really what it was, a verse that I had learned in Jewish school. I went to rigorous Jewish school till I was 19, half the day in Hebrew, half the day in English. And a verse from the Bible in Hebrew came to my brain. I hadn't said it since second grade. And it was, wisdom begins with fear of God. And then I realized, and it was one of the great revelations of my life, there's no wisdom at Columbia because there's no God at Columbia. There is not a single, forgive me, this is so important, I just want to say it. There is no wise secular institution. There are individual people who are, but there is no wise secular institution. And that is the crisis of the university and the rest of our schools. They are radically secular and radically stupid.
And go ahead.
Well, Sam, I just wanted to tell you that typically we don't prepare for the interviews. We don't do that here.
We don't do that here.
So I'll ask you about the cover. What made you choose this cover?
You're the first person to ask me about the cover. Well, the cover, so here's the book. So the cover is Moses presumably being visited. I don't even know if it's, the painter had it in mind. This is a very old painting, but it follows the series of my books. By the way, they're gorgeously printed. I commend my, do you know that in my contract, I actually say I have to approve the paper?
Oh,
nice.
It's in my contract.
You don't have the fakey Gideon's, motel tableside
Right.
paper.
The fish wrapping paper that many books are. Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't have that.
Well,
But yeah.
I mean, the book, beautifully wrought. Back on the content of it, another
The
thing.
gold lettering is etched with a Jewish space laser.
How did you know that?
You can tell.
So
Because it goes from right to left.
Yeah.
so I did over prepare. I'll admit it.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Another thing I wanted to ask about was, I mean, the anecdotal side of the book was one of my favorite things about it. Sprinkling in of stories for human interest. The story about how you made a conscious choice to have faith earlier in your life, but then how faith is always rational. I wanted to ask about your youth. Would you say you were a menace when you were growing up?
Yeah.
Dennis
In fact,
the Menace.
Not only was I, but I actually loved when people said Dennis the Menace. I not only did I not regard it as insulting, I reveled in it.
Did you shoot Mr. Wilson next door with like a slingshot or a space laser or?
No, but I am embarrassed to say, and I really am, I'm not joking, I'm embarrassed to say, in 7th grade, I grew up in Brooklyn where, it snowed during the winter. And on occasion, I threw snowballs at the bus driver when he opened the bus door. I've never said this publicly.
Wow.
But so I was Dennis the Menace.
So that's funny about your faith beginning in early life. I mean, one other thing I liked about the book is that you take it on faith that it's divinely inspired, which puts the onus on you to grapple with morally difficult sections. The buzzword that the left throws at the Torah is genocide. And you handle that question with aplomb because you basically take it as your responsibility to have faith, but then make it rational. Can you speak any more to rationality and faith, where they intersect, how they relate?
Well, for me, it's not even an intersection. My route to God is completely through reason. I'm not saying it's the only good route. Everyone has his or her own. That is mine. God gave us reason. He wants us to use it. As God says to the Israelites, this is your wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the world. Live it properly. I think God wants us to be rational. Don't follow your heart is one of the most repeated laws in the Bible. And what does that mean? It means don't follow feelings. Follow what is right, not what feels good. And the conflict between the heart and the mind is the central conflict of the Torah and of the Bible generally. So that has been my route. And that's why I call it the rational Bible. People who are more mystically oriented may enjoy the book, but it doesn't speak to them as directly as those who have rational problems with God or the Bible specifically. I try to answer every single problem. I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. I think it's actually in there because I do talk about my own life on occasion, as you know. So I've had 5 public dialogues with Professor Alan Dershowitz, who was a secular professor of law at Harvard. And the first one was like 20 years ago in Manhattan. And in the middle of the dialogue, I looked at the audience because it was about religion and reason and all of this stuff. And I said, I figured out the primary difference between Professor Dershowitz, for whom I have great respect, by the way, and myself. I said, when Alan Dershowitz thinks the Torah is wrong, he says the Torah is wrong and he is right. When I think the Torah is wrong, I say I am wrong and the Torah is right. And then he looked at the audience and said, for the first time tonight, I agree with Dennis.
That's incredible. It's divinely inspired, so it's your need to fall in line under it. I like the authors and the scholars that you cite. I mean, your book is replete with just appeals to not just Maimonides, Rashi, and the Talmud, but also Christian commentators on the Torah. I noticed a name kept popping out at me because I go to Grace Community Church, which is affiliated with the Master's Seminary, where where Dr. Michael Grisanti works out of, and you cite his commentary on Deuteronomy more frequently than almost anything else other than the rabbis. What we wanted to ask you is this. You've obviously rubbed shoulders with Christian scholarship and Christians throughout your radio and now digital careers and your writing careers. What Christian in your life has given you the most convincing altar call?
The most convincing what?
Altar call. Who has tried to make you walk the sawdust trail? Big revival.
So I don't have one answer. You are entirely right in noting how many Christian scholars I quote, and I will tell you why. I've always gambled telling the truth, even though some people will not enjoy what I have to say, and I hope that's not true, but I will tell you why. I want scholarship and faith. So secular scholars of the Bible I read, but they don't give me much strengthening of my faith. There are religious commentators who don't appeal to me because they're just faith and they don't use scholarship or reason. The people most likely in our time to combine scholarship and faith are Christian scholars. So I love them.
Wow.
All right. Maybe they're onto something.
Yes, maybe they're onto something. Well, they are. Look, okay. Obviously, if I believed in Christ as a Christian does, I would be a Christian, obviously. If you believed the way I do, you'd be a Jew. I happen not to find this to be a problematic issue in the least, because I truly believe that Christians like you are doing God's work. It's not a compliment. It's a statement of faith on my part. And even though you obviously have theological issues with me, most Christians know how valuable I am to Christians. Look, there are 5,000 reviews of my Rational Bible on Amazon. That's a lot. And the number of people who said, this guy Prager brought me back to church, is a very large number, and I'm very proud of that.
I mean, to say that we're grateful for the work that you do for truth and for the conservative movement would be an understatement. One thing early in the book that caught my ear, and this isn't one of our written questions, but I'm glad we're opening up and probing. I noticed that you had basically said that not just the Torah, but the whole Tanakh, the whole Jewish Bible, really doesn't make as much a distinction between believers and unbelievers as between the good and the evil. I think us as born-again New Testament Christians would say the difference is just believers, unbelievers. Has your sin been taken care of by Christ, or are you not a believer, in which case you're still under judgment? Can you speak any more to that comment in your book about how most of the Tanakh, the Torah, is about the good versus the evil?
Well, this is the fundamental theological difference between the two religions. The question to me, though, since I don't judge people, and I don't believe God does, by their theology, but by their behavior, is you, Christians like you, first of all, Christians like you founded the greatest country that ever existed, the United States of America. Jews didn't found it, Catholics didn't found it, Muslims didn't found it, atheists didn't found it, Protestant Christians founded it. That's just a fact. It's not even a compliment. It's just a fact. So my gratitude to you is enormous. But even putting aside all emotion, since I judge people as I believe God wants me to by their behavior, the Christianity that you follow has produced an enormous number of good people and a wonderful country, which is under siege and is becoming a worse country, which is because Christianity is descending in its popularity and its following. This is a catastrophe for Jews, for atheists, for Muslims, for Christians. So yes, I do believe God judges people by their behavior. End of issue. That is correct. But in the final analysis, if you as a Christian accept James, that it is what is it?
Faith without works is dead.
That's right. Faith without works is dead. Then we meet at James, and that's a pretty big deal.
We should look into throwing it out of the canon. Would you be able to look into that?
By the way,
Get rid of James.
Luther,
Luther
you'll
didn't
find
like
this. Do you know that Luther wanted to get rid of James?
Yep. He had some nice things to say about the Jews too.
That's right. Yes, exactly. I'm in good company.
All right. Well, we want to respect your time. We only got a few minutes left. We're going to ask.
Well, listen, I want. You guys are so special to me. I want to invite myself on again.
Please come back. Well, we have a few rapid fire questions to finish off with, if you're okay with that. The first one is you're being sent to AOC's gulags, and you're given a VHS player and a television. What tape do you bring with you?
I would probably bring. Well, if it was and I could bring nothing else.
Yeah, just a movie, just like one VHS tape.
Well, wait. So again, does it have to be a movie? Does it have to be a book? Could be anything?
No, it has to be a movie.
Or it could be home videos.
Oh, a movie.
Yeah, it's a movie.
Oh, okay.
A VHS tape.
So if I were to see one movie over and over and over, it would probably be, ironically, Groundhog Day.
That's
awesome.
funny. I've got a question. What's the dumbest thing you did as a teenager?
Threw snowballs at bus drivers.
He already got there.
Good answer. Quick question.
Number 3, what is your karaoke song of choice, and can you sing it for us right now?
That's not fair. It's not fair to your listeners.
Okay.
I have a wonderful speaking voice, and God did not grant me. It's ironic because I do conduct orchestras. I am a musician.
Oh, but not singing.
I'm a serious musician, but nobody's ever asked me to sing anything.
Okay. All right.
Next time we'll have him sing Bohemian Rhapsody, easiest karaoke song I've ever heard of.
Yeah, that's right. Or Bach Goldberg variations.
Beautiful. Okay, our next question. You can ask God any one question. What do you ask him?
Why did you invent a mosquito?
All right, our last question. We tried this last time. You said no. We're going to try again. Will you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior right now?
So what? If I said yes, would you think I was bluffing?
I mean, you know.
Chalk another one up to the B.
A yes is a yes, man.
happened.
A yes is a yes. We'll take it.
I accept you as doing God's work as Christians on behalf of my favorite book, the Torah. I can't give you a higher theological compliment.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Dennis. We really appreciate it. Everybody go check out the book, Dennis Prager, Deuteronomy, God, Blessings and Curses from the Rational Bible.
Thank you.